African Missions Translation Debacle. That's the title of the presentation I want to give. I want to talk briefly about the AVM, the Alliance for Vulnerable Mission. You may have heard that on the 6th of February this year, after being CEO for 18 years, I handed over the AVM to a new leadership. What does the AVM do? It considers largely hidden but very serious problems faced by missionaries today. Wants to make people aware of these problems and to provide some resolution. African cultures, as of those of other people of the majority world, I think will agree, are different from Western cultures. That is to say, African people's ways of life are different from those of Western people. In order to examine the problem I'm referring to, let's imagine that Africans play soccer, and that's all they do, and Westerners play tennis, and that's all they do. So this is a simplification, but the issue it illustrates, I think you'll agree, is actually very real. I want to look at translation between soccer and tennis. So someone who plays soccer says, "I scored a goal." How do you translate that into tennis? Perhaps it is, "I hit the ball over the net." Of course, there's no goal in tennis. But succeeding is not hitting the ball into the net, it's hitting the ball over the net. Okay, another example. In soccer, someone says, "Bill made a good corner kick." How should one translate that into tennis language? Perhaps, "Bill made a serve," as of course there are no corner kicks in tennis either. In soccer, someone might say this, "Ian is good at passing the ball." How do you say that in tennis, in which the ball is not passed? That's difficult, but people do expect translation to happen. So you might translate that to say something like, "Ian is good at hitting the ball." Now, another example, in soccer, someone might say, "David is good at dribbling." How does that translate into tennis? The mind boggles. Perhaps David bounces the ball. Now, I think you'll agree this all seems very confusing. The contrast between soccer and tennis illustrates difficulties inherent to translating what people are saying and doing in Africa. Translating, in other words, in such a way that people in the UK and in the West in general get to understand what's going on. You will see that a missionary who knows Africa well, explaining things to their supporters and others, makes a lot of assumptions and can be forced to be very inaccurate, basically because the ways of life of people are so different. But let me tell you, things get even more confusing. If tennis is a game of the West and is different from soccer, that's a game of Africa, then one role of a Western missionary used to be to translate what is happening in Africa for their own people to understand, to explain this is what's going on in Africa. But what happens, as now, when English, i.e. the language of the West, the language of tennis, is widely used in Africa, even though the African people are playing soccer? In other words, how do soccer players report on their game to tennis players if they themselves have learned the language of tennis? It's like this. Someone who scored a goal, that's in soccer language, will simply say, "I hit the ball over the net," in tennis language. Someone who made a good corner kick, soccer language, will say, "I've made a good serve," tennis language. Someone who's good at passing will simply say, "I'm good at hitting the ball." Someone good at dribbling will say, "I'm good at bouncing the ball." Now, an informed Westerner may point out that what Africans are saying is not true. Now, they'd be correct to point that out. because actually an African is not bouncing the ball, he's dribbling the ball. But it is true for the Africans, the soccer players. After all, they've been told to, in soccer, score a goal is to, in tennis, hit the ball over the net, and so on. So, although Westerners might think they're saying untruths, Africans might not consider themselves being dishonest at all. These days we say soccer players must be right. That is, Africans having taken English, tennis language, for their own users, Western tennis players can't continually be telling African people that what they're saying is not true. As a result, confusingly, taking one example, and the one above in the net, a goal, and over the net, a successful serve in tennis come to be the same thing. So in the net means the same as over the net. Confusing, as I say. The above illustrates what is happening in contexts in which missionaries work. They are contexts of belief in magic. Translation has disappeared and has not been replaced. A goal is the same as over the net. A corner is the same as a serve. A pass is to hit the ball. To dribble is to bounce a ball, and so on. This is the case whether tennis players, that is Westerners, agree that it is or not. So mission used to be a means of trying to guide African people to be more Christian, like the West. But in the above case, in which English is used in Africa, Africa already appears to be as Christian in Europe, because they say the same things that we're saying, even if they're doing something different. In that sense, when Africans use English, there's nothing to teach except secular Western curricula that we also teach to English people. The assumption that soccer is the same as tennis underlying all this has magically done away with the need for Christian mission, or has concealed the need for it. This is a big problem. The globalization of English is killing Christian mission and a lot of other things. This is why the AVM advocates that some Western missionaries should use local languages and resources in their ministry. That way they can be honest and tell others how to be honest. They can, to a greater extent than others, explain what Africa is like to the West. They can relate to people without depending on magic. They can minister to African people without making them dependent on magic, i.e., they can share the true gospel. The AVM, the Alliance for Vulnerable Mission, has realized the above problem or problems. Others seem not to have noticed it. The magical mission of translation going on today under the banner of globalization is creating endless difficulties that many people remain almost totally blind to. Of particular concern to the AVM, Western missionaries to Africa and other parts of the majority world should, well, really some of them must use indigenous languages in their ministries, even if the people they are reaching now also know English. Also, to prevent the people being reached just saying things that will please the missionary, missionaries should not be distributing funds to people they work with.